Changeworking, moving minds for change that lasts.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Changeworking, a show for practitioners and coaches who help their clients create change. My name is Ruckus, and as always, I'll be in conversation with James Tripp. Today, we're talking about timeline and memory reconsolidation. I'm very excited about this because timeline specifically is a tool, a protocol that I find incredibly useful. In my own personal transformation and healing journey, I've gotten a lot of use out of timeline and also with clients. And I spoke about this in other episodes. I use this all the time in conjunction with other modalities, specifically parts work. I find it very easy to go back and forth and combine them in unique and creative ways that I find to get great results for my clients and for myself personally. That said, I do want to caveat that this is not a class or training about how to do timeline. We talk about the process and around it and mention some of the steps in passing, but there's much, much more to it than what we get into in this episode. So if you're not familiar with it and you find it intriguing, please, I encourage you to seek it out and get some training in it because I think you will find it incredibly useful. I certainly do. With that said, let's get right into it. Here's my conversation with James about timeline and memory reconsolidation. I feel like there's probably different versions of what people call timeline. I know specifically Tad James trademarked timeline therapy, and I don't know if that's different than timeline or if that's just something he did for training so only he could certify you.
I think that was a business move. There's some controversy behind the scenes as to who originated that timeline material.
Yeah.
I think rightly, there's particularly some controversy because I think Steve Andreas was involved in a lot of the development of it. Timeline, I believe, it originates from the Bandler side of things after the sort of Bandler-Grinder split.
Oh, okay.
As does all the submodalities stuff.
Oh.
A great deal of the NLP processes that people come to know are more post-split, and they're more from the Bandler side. I would say Bandler was definitely more prolific in terms of creating processes. So that whole submodalities thing, John Grinder wasn't into that at all. And I think that may even have been a part of what took them in different directions.
So if I just say timeline to you, what does that mean? You tell me what you think of for timeline.
I'm going to caveat everything I say because I don't claim to be a particular expert in this kind of timeline stuff. And there's a lot of rumors and stuff about what comes from where and what the relationships are between different things.
Sure.
But the initial idea of timeline, now there's kind of two sorts of ways we can think about timeline, and they can relate. One of them is how people tend to organize time in their minds, particularly people in the Western world. And there's two sort of distinctions. There's three, but I'm going to stick with two, which is in time and through time. So when somebody is in time, they generally see their future in front of them and their past behind them. They unconsciously spatially organize in this way. When they are through time, they tend to, and there are some exceptions to this, but most people will tend to see their future off to their right and their past off to their left. Now, you can do this really simply with somebody and say, if you had to point, right, in any random direction, but you were pointing to the time you were born, where would you point? Don't think about it, just point. You go, whoom. If you had to point to 1 year from now, where would you point? Whoom. Then you go, this person's a through time person. Now, you don't have to do this. You watch anybody talking about the future, the past, whatever. You watch them. You'll see where they gesture. You can pick their internal organization time from where they gesture. Now, as I'm talking about this, people that know timeline therapy may go, I think maybe Tad James talks about this, eliciting somebody's timeline as a bit of a move up the front end. I'm not sure it really does anything for the client. It's just like a curio piece for them. They go, oh, yeah, that is interesting. Now, I've sometimes used this, by the way, because what I will sometimes do, or I used to do, and I may do again at some point in the future, is I say to somebody, if you had to point to where you were born, where would it be? Boom. And if you had to point to, I don't know, 5 years from now, where would it be? And they go over there and say, when you just see that kind of like out there in front of you, going between those 2 points. And this event that you've been talking about, whereabouts on that line would that be? They go, about there. Right. So that's a sort of a timeline utilization, which is different. But what I'm having, and this is conversational,
right?
But I'm having them spatially organized about there, right? Now, at that point, I might use the difference that makes a difference and say, as you see it like this, you're born there, 5 years is there, and then there's everything beyond that, and there's that event right there, and you're sat here right now looking at that. What do you notice that's different for you? What is it that's unique in this moment as you see that event right there? And they'll say some stuff and I'll feed that back in because there's a dissociation. Now they're relating to it. They're not in the experience. I'm talking about if somebody's got like a traumatic event that they may have lost themselves in. Very useful thing to do. Now, this can start leading on to timeline therapy stuff. I'm not Tad James trained. I never did the formal timeline therapy pattern. But if I understand it rightly, having somebody go into their mind, you're taking them back to an event and you have them go up above that event and just before that event. Am I right? Is that the one that you know?
But yeah, the version I learned, and I don't know if this is Tad James' version or just what I learned, but yeah, there's 3 positions where if you're facing the past, looking at the memory, you're directly above it looking down, or you're in the past looking at the future, you're behind and the memory hasn't actually happened.
Right.
The version I learned is if you go directly above it and you have them absorb all the learnings, everything that there is to be learned, then you go behind it and basically release the negative. You depotentiate it and then go back in front of it and see if you can feel it again. That idea of depotentiating a memory or reconstructing a memory, or there's a version where you depotentiate it, put a split in the timeline and literally create a newer, more positive memory.
Right.
This idea.
So one of the good things about this, and I'm always saying to people, learn the maneuvers. What do each maneuver do? So if you take something like that, what that gives you the opportunity to do is facilitate somebody's perspectives on the event. Now, you're taking a literal perspective shift as a metaphorical perspective shift, or maybe it's always a metaphorical perspective shift. So what is it like when you look at it from over here? What is it like when you look at it from over there? So you're technically changing, you could say it's changing the submodalities. It's not that different from what is it like when you see it twice as far away or anything like this. You're just changing the relationship to the material. That's what you're doing. So when you change your relationship to the material, you can always, now this is where I love to do check-ins, where a lot of people won't do the check-in. They just do this, do that. It's, okay, so what is it like from here? What do you notice from here? So you get those differences. All of this stuff is essentially about reprocessing material in ways that it has not been processed before. You could look at it in terms of memory reconsolidation. Normally, when we access a memory, we access it in approximately the same way. We don't access it in a variety of different ways. As soon as you access a memory in a variety of different ways, and you can stabilize those different perspectives, so the person doesn't just collapse back into their original way of remembering, due to the reconstructive nature of memory, you start to change the way that memory is held in the system, the way it's encoded. You change the neural network of it, if you like. That's one way of thinking about it. So even that bit on its own is valuable. But that bit is harder to get somebody to make sense of, to do, if you haven't laid out the timeline first. The timeline gives you the chassis, the structure, the reference points to be able to invite those perspective shifts. Without the timeline, you could technically do it without the timeline. But if somebody said, oh, I don't know, when I was 7 years old, this terrible thing happened. If you said to them, so I'm curious, as you remember that now, what is it that you see? Are you inside of it or are you outside of it? I'm inside of it. So if you were to float out of that experience, up above that experience, so that you could look down and see that occurring right there, right now. And you are up here and all of that is happening down there. And what is it that you notice now that's different from before? Now you've got that first shift. You don't have to set the timeline up formally, right? You don't have to do that. I will say about timeline, I have a program that I put out years ago called Hypnotherapy Heresy. And I think I mentioned in one of the other recordings, start with some simple stuff, get good at that, add something to it. Hypnotherapy Heresy was about that. I'm going to give you some really simple things you can run a whole hypnotherapy practice off. And one of the things that I taught people to do was set up a timeline as a trance induction. So I would start a trance induction, because it was hypnotherapy heresy, not NLP heresy. They could close their eyes. They could just relax and connect into themselves, right? And you can continue to relax now more deeply into yourself to the point where it's almost as if you could float up, all the way up with a growing sense of comfort, all the way up to the point where if you could look down, you could see all of the experiences of your life, stretching back in time in one direction, all of the experiences of your future stretching all the way out in the other direction. So I'd set up a very trancey timeline like this. I could go off on a tangent as to why those particular language choices are in there, but I won't do that right now. Now, when I would do this, immediately you are taking somebody into a broad overview of their whole life, right? There's this sense that your whole life is there, right? But what I did with Hypnotherapy Heresy was, instead of going back and we're going to find these traumatic events, I would do the opposite. I would do almost like what you might call future sourcing. He started out doing this. He didn't call it future sourcing. I would have them go all the way forward in time to visit a future version of themselves who'd already made the changes they were here to make. So you can go the other way. This is the thing about a timeline as a format. It's actually quite a useful. My point in hypnotherapy heresy is you could build a whole therapy practice around timeline, because you can go back to events and you can reprocess them, but you can go forward to future versions of yourself who have already made the changes you want to make and got the resources. You can get a sense of what it's like to be that person, how it is to live that way. You can have the person turn around on the timeline, look back to the present, and become aware of what it was that you did differently. What were the changes that you made on the pathway to being here now? So you can do a lot with that timeline framework. And if you're a new sort of practitioner, particularly, you can get a lot of bang for your buck with it. But it gives you that touchstone, right? I know what I'm doing. I know we're going around the timeline. Everything is anchored to that timeline, so to speak. So it gives you a structure for the whole session. So it's a pretty good process from that perspective. I think you can get a lot of value from it. And you were mentioning yourself about figuring out you could segue out and do parts work and then segue back in again. So I think I say I haven't done a timeline for a long time, but that's not because I don't value it. It's not because I don't see the utility of it. And I have made good use in the past, way, way back, of that sort of format and structure. But really, it's just a way of organizing the work, I think.
Yeah, the part that I found that I've gotten the most use out of, me personally now, with clients too, but with me, is the part about depotentiating any negative energies from the memory. It's one of those things, I call it just like, this should be basic human knowledge we're taught when we're 6, that you can change your memory.
Right.
And have a positive effect on your life. And people don't know that. I don't know how many people in my life, 99% of the people in my life who are not involved in hypnosis or NLP don't realize that's a thing that you can do. It sounds crazy.
People don't, but you often get people. So there's a concept that I call the truth trap, right? People are like, they value truth over utility. So if you don't play the frames right around it, what you can get, and this might be just related to the kind of client demographic that I work with, what you can get is people going, but that isn't what happened. It's no, don't take the truth away from me. Because they don't get that memory is just, it's like a confabulation in the first place, because it is a confabulation. I'm not saying it's confabulated from nothing, but it's a confabulation. So there's sometimes a little bit of work to do around that. And one of the ways I'll play this is say, we're going to play with some differences for a time here. And I'm going to suggest that you don't take any of this too seriously, because there's a part of you that can always know any truth that you need to know. But for now, this is just about play. I often find one of the best frames to do change work in is the frame of, we're not really changing anything right now, so you don't need to worry about that. We're just doing some exploration. Now I can let my guard down and not defend my reality as it is. I do think it's useful, but a lot of the time some people are alarmed by the idea that their memory is a highly fallible thing. That's a really scary idea for them. It's like, no, I've got to know. That's really what happened. But I think when people can loosen their grip around the memory, and one of the best ways to get people to loosen their grip is to get them to play with the memory and get new substance out of it, new goodness out of it. And then when they see for themselves, then they can be like, oh yeah, no, this is more valuable than clinging onto some truth. That's my reckoning on it.
The framing you just talked about being play, we're just playing.
Yeah.
Is that a default thing you do, or is it if you've picked up on that this is the type of client that is going to be a little more resistant?
Look, here's the thing about resistance. We'll talk about resistance here for a bit. Some people are like, they love this, oh, there's no resistance. I think Steve DeShazer of Solution Focused Brief Therapy, he once held a party for the death of resistance once he changed his view and the view of his team. I think that there's resistance. I don't think it's a bad thing. If we were not resistant, we would be utterly unstable, because we've got to resist. If I just accept any truth that somebody lays on me, without what do I become? I become unstable, right? All the time we're selfing, we're recreating ourself in a kind of stable way. It's an ongoing process, but we want to hold on to things. So we're actually quite resistant by nature to change. If you had a client come along who had no resistance in the system, let's look at it in parts terms, there were no parts that didn't want to change, they wouldn't even be hiring you. They'd have already gone and changed everything. So it's quite natural for there to be parts that are invested in stasis, invested in holding on. Now, one thing you can do with that is, of course, you can go find some of those parts. You can find that and you can do some parts work that will shift that and loosen the grip of that resistance. That can be a very valuable thing to do. Another thing that you can do is placate those parts for a bit, let them go to sleep by saying that we're not changing anything. We're going to do a little bit of exploration for a time here. I'm going to suggest that you do this playfully. I absolutely would advocate that you change nothing for now, right? I will do that with clients. I will say, for now, change nothing, right? I do not implement any of this. So it's that reverse psychology thing. And they go, or one of my favorite lines is, there's no rule in the universe that says we have to change anything here today. We can just find out something that could be useful for you. Like, oh, thank God I don't have to change anything. Oh, yeah, you hired me to help you change.
I found myself saying, if you're up for experimenting, we're just going to try a few things. Just know that if you like it less, we can absolutely put it right back the way it was before. And if they go, oh, okay, then they're totally game.
So, yeah, I think it's a similar thing. It's just, we're just going to do this for a short amount of time is another one that I'll do.
Oh, that's fun.
Just for a time, move that twice as far away or something like that. Just for a time, notice how you feel different. I love that line as well because it goes, we can play with this time-bound change. The implication is that it can always be put back. There's different ways to look at hypnosis, for example, or hypnotism. There's different ways to look at it. But one of them is the idea that it's just about suggestion. And I think I read a bit out from an Erickson book to you the other day about hypnosis, about getting people to respond to ideas. I would say it's about getting people to create difference with ideas that you offer them. That's what suggestion is. So you're suggesting different ideas. Now, the question is your vehicle for suggestion, okay? What is your vehicle for suggestion? Now, any sort of NLP process, anything like that, you can look at it as a process, as a series of moves and maneuvers, right? Go here, now go there, now do this, now do that. You can look at it as a series of moves, but you can also equally look at it as a vehicle for suggestion, right? Every bit, what is it that's being suggested, usually indirectly? What is the idea that is being seeded with every move? So if you say to somebody, you go back to now just allow yourself to float up and be just before that memory, just before that experience, and notice what you notice from there, right? Even that, notice what you notice from there, implies difference, implies there is something different to notice. Now, that is actually a suggestion sequence. There's a whole bunch of ideas in that. The basic implied idea is you can move in relation to your experience. That is a basic idea that is being suggested by requesting that move. So there are actually ideas being seeded all the time by the process. A lot of processes, if you start thinking about them, okay, there's the process, there's the shifting, there's also a vehicle for suggestion here. You might think a little bit more about what you might want to suggest at any moment. Right? So you could say, so as you move up, what do you notice that's different? What do you notice just releasing here? Now, if you do, that's a massive suggestion. You could do that. You can go, how clean do I want to be and how much do I want to suggest? So there's always the opportunity as well to be thinking in terms of suggestion. What would I love to suggest here? What suggestions can I offer that would move somebody in a useful, transformative direction? And I think timeline, just like any process, can be a vehicle for suggestion as well.
One thing when I was first studying hypnosis, I didn't have a concept of how much could be done completely content-free. And that I was genuinely like, amazing to me. And timeline is very much one of I don't have to know what the client's memory is. That's just interesting to me. The parts of timeline that I most connected with was depotentiating memories and changing them. And you mentioned earlier memory reconsolidation, but you used the term earlier. And I think your friend was just teaching a class about it, but I heard him say it was some version of timeline as well. So is it two separate?
Memory reconsolidation is simply the idea, as I understand it, and again, I'm not claiming to be a scholar on this. I don't know if he's the guy that sort of coined the term, but there was somebody at some point in the maybe 90s, maybe early 2000s, a neuropsychologist came up with this idea. I'm not a scholar, so I don't have references much of the time. And of course, and this is from outside the world of NLP or anything like this, this mainstream stuff, entirely validates loads of NLP stuff and provides a mechanism by which it works and all of this kind of thing. A lot of people who want to debunk NLP go, yeah, but that was a discovery that was made aside from NLP. Yeah, but it still verifies why NLP might work, right? But aside from that point, memory reconsolidation, it's just the recognition that memory doesn't work like a video camera. We hold memories and the way we hold the memory changes the shape of the memory. Now, we respond to the memory outside of consciousness. That's learned material. That's what kind of memory is about. It's about learning. So we hold it in a particular way. We assume that we remember the thing happening the way it happened. But memory is reconstructive by its nature. And this has been demonstrated. Elizabeth Loftus has done a lot of research on this. And it actually opens up quite a lot of controversy with your sort of Bessel van der Kolks of this world and the people who are very much into repressed memories. And also it's very relevant for people who think they can use hypnosis to recover repressed memories. That's an extremely dodgy bit of work to be done. Memory is a nebulous thing. It is a reconstructive thing. It is very easy to create false memories, incredibly easy. Hypnosis and communication are better at creating false memories than recovering repressed memories by far, right? By a long way.
Wow.
Anybody who questions this, check out Elizabeth Loftus's research on eyewitness testimony, all the work she did, not installing false memories with hypnosis, but with interviews. So she did a lot of work to show how easy it was to create false memories. She got involved in a lot of court cases because if you go back to the sort of era of the kind of satanic ritual abuse thing.
Yeah, satanic panic in the 80s, yeah.
Yeah, the satanic panic and all of this. There's some people I know who are still 100% on board with, no, that was all facts and it's all... But there are a lot of people that got convicted who then had their convictions, as I understand it, overturned because of the work that Elizabeth Loftus did. And this is referred to in some quarters as the memory wars. So the memory wars was this period where you had a bunch of people pushing this idea of you get these repressed memories. When you reveal them, they're absolutely true. And we can tell these memories are repressed by certain symptoms. And then you had Elizabeth Loftus, who's at the vanguard of this. And she really went through hell because this was the dominant paradigm. And she actually got her funding slashed and all sorts of things. She was attacked from all sides for doing this research. But in the end, her view came through. It was that you could manipulate memory like crazy. And there was no way of eliciting. This is one of the reasons why David Grove with clean language is so clean, because he knows full well how easy it is to influence memory-based material. And his original work was working with trauma, right? So he didn't want to suggest traumatic experiences in there that never happened. Whereas like actually psychoanalysis is very good at drawing people towards dubious things in the past that may never have happened. It's a huge area, but in the end, once you go, okay, I'm not saying that repressed memory isn't a thing. I don't think it's memory as such. I think we can have events that we can push out. I'm not in that hard camp that says there's no memory repression. Elizabeth Loftus pointed out there's no evidence of memory repression. You cannot scientifically verify the idea of repressed memories. That doesn't mean that doesn't happen. But she pointed out that there's no scientific evidence for repressed memories. There's no way you can verify it scientifically, but you can verify how you can manipulate and create memories scientifically. Anyway, that was an aside. But if you take the recognition, memory is malleable. I mean, it's stunningly malleable. And we respond to what we have held in our memory banks or whatever. And I love that term, held in our memory banks. Once you start recognizing that, you can now see how so much trauma therapy work, and now this is really getting influenced by this more and more, is just about getting people to re-access and re-encode that memory. Here's an interesting thing about traumatic events. Some traumatic events don't become traumatic until years after the event. Why is that? I've seen this countless times. I'm not saying this is always the case, but it's sometimes the case. And what it is that somebody's value sets change or their way of seeing it changes, and it doesn't make it a better memory. It makes it a worse memory. They go, oh my God, why did I do that? What does it mean about me that I did that? Now I'm looking at it from this new value set. Post hoc traumatization occurring, which is the opposite of what we want to do. We want to have somebody become at peace with some material, become okay with that material, become unaffected by it. But just as you can become unaffected by memory-based material that in the past affected you, you can become affected by, negatively, past memory-based stuff that didn't affect you before. It can go both ways. And I've seen this happening with some clients that I've worked with. So really, what you're doing with memory reconsolidation is you're going in and you're transforming, the way I put this is you're transforming how this memory is held within their neurology, within their system, within their mind, within their being. So it's held in a more peaceful way, a way that's not activating their threat response systems anymore. That's all it is.
Is memory reconsolidation, quote unquote, a tool or a protocol, or is that just a general term, a bunch of ways of working?
No, it's just, there's 1,000 ways you could do it. There's 1,000 ways you can do
Okay.
it. You can do it early, you can do it like in a process, you could do it like a lot of the time, it's like seeing the opportunity to do it. And sometimes it can be done so simply. And again, like I really love the humanization. I remember I did a demo for a clean language conference, and I was not entirely clean, right? And I can't remember the exact details, but I could see an event came up and there was like a sort of traumatized activation around this event. And the person was saying about these things, a memory had popped, and there was something about how they'd reacted, and there was a judgment around it. And this was all coming out. So I broke the clean protocol and I said, something like that's a very human thing. It's understandable that a human being would feel so devastated about something like that's very human. Anyway, and she shifted and released greatly. And at the end of the session, somebody said, I'm curious why you felt the need to rescue the client at that point. I said, I don't think, because I'd been unclean and that was being framed as rescuing the client. I said, I don't think I was really rescuing the client. I think I was just being a human being. And that's one of my critiques of clean language, strict clean language adherence, is they stop being human beings, even though I love clean language, but I absolutely do. At that moment, now, I said, let's ask the client. I said, did you feel rescued? I'm curious, what was your experience in that moment? She said, to be truthful with you, that was the most useful thing of the whole session because she got a really big shift from that. And it's because her memory, let's analyze this in some way. Her memory complex had been holding this judgment in it. There's something uniquely wrong with me because of this. All I did was say it's a very human thing, basically. Oh, I'm not a freak. I'm not some unique special case of horribleness, right? So that recodes the material that's associated with that memory complex and unravels a judgment. So now that as a piece of driver material for behavior has changed. So memory reconsolidation can be just like you see the moment and you change the frame, if you want to use the term reframing. You bring something different to it. It's just, so a lot of the time when I'm doing that stuff, I'm seeing it when it's coming up. Sometimes, like if somebody's going into something, I think that's one of the reasons why I started to do the event that started me doing more visual squash this recently is I wanted dissociation. The person I was working with, the part when it was active was taking over the whole system. They were becoming lost in it. When somebody goes into an experience and they get lost in it, they are revivifying it. You can't do good work with it because they just regress back to the state they were in. I'm not a fan of hypnotic regression. I think it's a bad idea, generally speaking. I think you're better off, like timeline isn't a regression. Timeline manages the relationship. It doesn't regress somebody back to that age. If you regress them back to that age in that time, then they have exactly the same resources they had then and there.
Right.
And those resources didn't help them, right? So if you want to lose resources, regress, fine. But if you want to keep resources, you want to bring a more resourced self back to the past material so that you can put it back together in a different way. And that's a really key thing. So like I started to do visual squash again recently because I had one client who kept losing themselves in the material and I couldn't stabilize a dissociation. So the easiest way to do it is go, so there's a part of you that wants to do X and Y and is bringing this state alive. And there's a part of you that wants to go beyond this. So which hand is now, and what do you see in that hand? So I've got a dissociation going on so they could stabilize themselves outside. They could also see a resource part, which ended up having a lot of symbolism in it for them. So that's a memory reconsolidation. And we did a piece of memory reconsolidation work with a visual squash. That was the best vehicle, I think, that I'm not saying it was the best. Maybe there would have been a better vehicle, but it was the one that I could find because I couldn't stabilize this client outside of collapsing into the traumatic memory. That was the way I found to do it. Then we could do reconsolidation work, which can include reframing, which could include different perspective taking. It could include clean language. It could include symbolism, metaphor, all manner of things. All of that stuff can change memory. Memory isn't just what happened. There's the conclusions we drew about life, the universe, and everything and ourselves from that. Or the certainties that got shattered and left us unmoored. The memory gets held in a bunch of sense. So it isn't a senseless, meaningless memory. I have memories from my childhood that existed before my autobiographical memory, before my biographical memory. That's not the right term. I'm using the wrong term there. So they're just flashes. They're like me looking down and seeing my fat legs in red boots or whatever. There's no story to them. There's no meaning to them. It's just a flash. It's just a memory. It doesn't impact me in any particular way because it didn't mean anything. The memories that impact us because of the meaning that we drew from them and the meaning that we hold them in. So we're looking to change the sense of the situation when we're doing memory reconsolidation. A lot of the time when people have had a traumatic experience, it's what it came to mean about them. On the most basic level, it's I don't have what it takes to survive or something like that. Or sometimes there's a shameful element to it as well. I've worked with people who felt that they were cowardly or something like that. They begged for their life or whatever. And the real thing is the fact they begged for their life. That's the bit that's wounding them, so to speak. And that they are a coward or something, or they're weak for having done so. Who wouldn't, right? So you're a human being, so it makes sense that you might do a thing like that. So once you're recoding that meaning at the deeper level, you got to have a certain amount of access to the memory to recode it and get that change happening. You can't just do it in abstract. They've got to have some kind of aliveness, some kind of connection to the memory. But you can't have the person get lost in the memory and have no higher faculty to bring to bear upon it. It's like almost half in, half out the memory, or close enough to it, just look close enough to it. Then you can do good memory consolidation work.
Yeah, I love this. I'm so fascinated by it. I was just going to say that I just had a flash remember of a session I did. I was doing timeline with a client, and I just said, just ask your mind, what is the first memory associated with this challenge we were working on? And they went back and they were like, I don't know what it is. It's just, they were looking at it from up above it, looking down. I just have a feeling of they had a negative feeling, but they literally didn't know what the memory was. It was black, but we still did the work. They depotentiated it and her whole body relaxed and everything. It's just amazing that she didn't even know what it was, but had that feeling and was still able to do the work.
Yeah, the memory isn't, the recollection of the memory isn't as important as the activation. Let's call it that neural network. It's the activation of that neural network. And again, if you look at David Grove's work, that's the place that he's hanging out. He doesn't want the memory to pop. He wants to stay out of the narrative material. This happened, then this. He wants to stay out of that. He wants to stay in the kind of the feeling and the effect and the sense, and he wants to interact with the sense via metaphor in the abstract. And David Grove talked about it as being, he said there's two ways you can reprocess memory. There's the blood and guts route, or there's my route. And for him, the blood and guts route is you go back, you visit the details of it, all of that. And he wanted to stay out of that. You can stay out of it, but often, interestingly, when you're working with David Grove's approach and you're trying to stay out of it, often with clients is the memory wants to pop anyway. So if you're trying to stay strictly, you end up trying to squash the memory down. But not really. David Grove did let the memory pop and he did work with it. He just didn't encourage it. But as long as you've got the thing activated, I've worked with people around traumatic activations, and we don't have to reference a memory. So long as the network is firing, there's probably past experiences, past learnings in that matrix. But you can work directly with it without having to pull the memory. And for a lot of people, that's a much more useful thing to do. And then other people will come in and they'll go, I had this terrible thing happen, and ever since that terrible thing happened, everything's been different for me. Now they're already talking, it's already there, they're already in touch with it.
Right.
So you may as well just go straight in through the memory.
One of the other little maneuvers that I liked in Timeline, and I don't know which version, but I find it useful, so I just do it, is I have a client will have a traumatic memory that they clearly know, and it's terrible. And if they were to just regress, go back, it would be an ab reaction. But it's just showing them that the farther and higher back you get, the less you feel of that memory. And we want to engage just enough so that we can work with that material. But when it starts to overwhelm, just back up a little, just go up a little higher.
Yeah.
And it's just so subtle and small. It's so easy to do, but I find that incredibly useful, I think.
Yeah, I think it is a very useful thing to do, and people will learn at another level. And some clients don't do it well. So some clients, there seems to be, I almost imagine in my mind a thick elastic cord they try and pull back and they just keep collapsing back in.
Oh, and just snapping them back in.
And they snap back in. And it's going to be different for different clients. So the client that I did the visual squash with, the first one that stepped me off on this string of visual squashes, initially I tried other ways to stabilize the dissociation. And none of them worked. You just get popping back in. This is my point about maneuvers. If you're trying to follow a process, and the step of the process is supposed to dissociate the person, but they're not staying dissociated, you have to solve that problem in a different way. You have to know that's what you were doing at that point, right? If you know what you were doing, you go, well, I need to find a different way of doing this. Then you can be creative. It's, what do I need to do here? Maybe this, maybe that. And, oh yeah, I haven't tried this or whatever. And in that instance, it's, visual squash. That's going to be what that seemed to offer itself up at that moment. And it ended up being the thing that worked to maintain the dissociation so we could do some work with it that was valuable and reconsolidative.
Well, I'm curious for anyone, especially me, who I want to do even more of a deeper dive on just quote memory reconsolidation in general. So timeline is a very obvious, this deals with memory. Offhand, what are any other like obvious NLP tools or hypnosis tools that are specifically for memory consolidation?
If you look at timeline, right, you've got Tad James timeline therapy, TM. But before that, you've got things like, I think the origins of timeline are more like things like change personal history and the decision destroyer. I think probably the decision destroyer, I don't know which one came first, change personal history or decision destroyer. And if you were to ask me right now, James, could you run me through those processes? The answer would be no. I haven't been near them for over 15 years and I can't, and I would probably muddle them up in my mind, and that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. But I think that this is the point. Now, I can't think whether the original change personal history and time and decision destroyer explicitly use the metaphor of timeline. But what they are, I think Richard Bandler has said that the point of a lot of the NLP processing stuff, when it was being created, it was a way of doing hypnosis without saying you were doing hypnosis, so that you could do things that hypnotists do, and specifically that Erickson did, but you could put them in packages where you could use them in a business context or without mentioning the H word. So a lot of them, there are ideas that Erickson would have been using in a very loose, free-form, nebulous way. But then Bandler have gone, oh, yeah, that kind of how that works. So we abstract the pattern and then we build a process around that, and then we can give it back to people so they can run it. And this is true of a lot of early NLP processes. So like new behavior generator, this is essentially, Erickson would do this all the time. Some people have called it future sourcing. He would call it his crystal ball method, though he would use the concept of crystal balls for many things, not just this. Anyway, so you've got change personal history, you've got decision destroyer. The idea of change personal history kind of speaks for itself, right? What could that be about, I wonder? And decision destroyer is specifically this idea that it plays on this frame that there's a decision that you made at some point in your life. Let's say you've got a problem, right? There's a decision you made that it's not safe to be yourself or something, right? So it gets framed explicitly as a decision. And then you find the moment in time in which that decision was made, if I'm remembering rightly. But these are definitely antecedents to the timeline idea and may even have explicitly used it. And I think Tad James was like, well, we'll do that and we'll add a few extra bits and TM it.
So those two, change personal history and the decision destroyer, those were explicit NLP protocols?
Yes, they are. There's also, and this is another kind of version that sort of uses a timeline as well, comes from Robert Dilts, which is re-imprinting. They're all roughly in the same kind of ballpark. And they're all coming out around that time. So the sort of NLP people were kicking these ideas around in the early 80s. This is early 80s NLP stuff.
Definitely makes me want to go look these up because, again, even if there's one little insight from change personal history that didn't make it to timeline therapy, but I love it, maybe I can start using that in there. That's why I always like to do the deep dive on where everything came from,
right? Not
just the version that's taught now.
Yeah, I think it's really good to go back and go, well, where did that come from? Where did that come from? Where did that come from? And this is part of the reason why I mentioned to you that I've recently been reading these sort of treatises from like 1820 or something on mesmerism and this kind of thing, because obviously what we're talking about in this podcast is not hypnosis and NLP, it's change technologies. It's like moving minds and changing lives, coaching or whatever. But there's a sense in which all modern psychology comes from that hypnosis mesmerism tradition. That's where it comes from. Freud was originally an artist before going, I'm going to drop that and do my psychoanalysis. You know why Freud sits behind people? Because the method of hypnosis he learned involved, which is mesmerism, he basically involved pressing the top of people's heads. So he needed to sit behind them on the couch so he could manipulate the tops of their heads. And then once he stopped using the hypnosis thing, he was just used to sitting up above there. So he came up with a different method, came up with a different explanation for why he would do that. But if it's really good to go back, in my view, because you get to strip back the simpler forms. You go, these people were getting results and they weren't doing half the work that people do these days. Mm-hmm. So what were they doing? How did that work? What was the value there? Where do we see that showing up now? Where does it fall short? How did that evolve from that into that? The early mesmerists, for a long time, they were doing their thing. One of their rules was you don't say anything. You're completely silent, which is how did we get from that to the world of suggestion and so much facilitation? And what was being suggested in silence? Where, if there was suggestion at play, where did it come in? So I think there's a real value in going back and looking at these things and finding the relationships. Even going back, I was looking at an old mesmerism manual, and the guy was saying in that it's useful, you're going to be silent throughout the process, but it's useful to let people know ahead of time that they may experience some interesting sensations and interesting changes. And when they come up, to just allow themselves to go with those things. And then later on, you get the kind of Ericksonian idea of you can just notice this and let it take you deeper into trance. So anything is taking you deeper into trance. Everything becomes something that's taking you deeper into trance. And then you can look at Erickson and go, actually, Erickson's utilization principle is everything that happens is taking you deeper into the change that you're making. So you get this, that idea relates back to that idea that relates back to that idea that relates back to that idea. For me, that enriches the understanding across the whole thing. So I think it's worth going back and go, well, what did it look like before it looked like that? And then what was the version before that? Yeah. If you have an interest in it, obviously that means a lot of ground to cover if you get into that.
Well, I like to ask the thought experiment questions and knowing, like you said, hypnosis is amazing at creating false memories. It's like, why would I not want to just sit around all day and create the most amazing memories of my childhood and my past?
Do you know the Bandler line on that? Richard Bandler says, it's never too late to have a happy childhood.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So I guess it's a thought experiment, but it is a real question. Is there a reason not to sit around and do that? Can I radically change my personality by doing things like that?
Look, I think there's a deeper question or consideration there. No memory, no past event is alive in any way other than the way we've held it in our minds or our being. What's true about who we are? Who we think we are, what we think happened, what is true about who we are. Now, we all want to have some kind of grounding, some kind of identity, some sort of sense of self at a deeper level. So we want to be grounded in some sense that we've made of ourselves. Now, if we decide, I want to make some different sense of myself so that I have a different ground of being, so I show up and I engage in the world in a different way, that's all great. But who is the you that knows best about how that should be? That's the question. Because if you say a part of you goes, I think I should be like this, there's another part of you going, no, that would be a bad idea. Going to be. Now, because we have an orientation to reality, not an orientation to fantasy, an orientation to reality. So even though most of what we think of as reality is just functional fantasy, there's a risk involved in starting to play fast and loose with the sense we make. I often give this example. There's a tram that runs outside my home, and I never step in front of it when it comes by. I never do. And there's a reason for that. Why don't you step in front of the tram? Well, it will probably kill me if I step in front of the tram. And it's, do you not think that's somewhat of a limiting belief? You would have so much more choice if you're able to step in front of the tram. Yeah, but I think it's a bad idea.
Right.
I really believe it's a bad idea. But your belief that it's a bad idea is just a belief, right? Now, it's not just a belief. It is a belief, but is it just a belief? Some beliefs, some renderings of reality are probably closer to the complex reality that's out there than others. So whilst the map is not the territory, it doesn't mean that all maps are equally valid in relation to the territory. I think that we have a kind of instinct for this. This is why we are naturally truth seekers. The upside of this is it creates a stable relationship with the world, which can be a good thing. The downside is if that stable relationship with the world is painful, is limiting, is debilitating, we still have the instinct to hold on to it as if it's truth. This is what I call the truth trap. So it's not entirely clear the work of, even if we go, I'm free to recreate all my beliefs, there's still another part of us going, but you don't want to be a delusional idiot. You don't want to believe reckless, dangerous things. If I go, I've repatterned my beliefs, so now I believe I can juggle chainsaws. Yeah, but if I can't, maybe I don't have the competence to juggle the chainsaw, and just convincing myself that I do is probably reckless. I do think, and this stuff, a lot of people don't think about this. We're not dumb. We don't cling on to our ideas about things for no reason. Those ideas are the ideas that, for whatever reason, make the best sense to us. And on an unconscious level, we believe, or at least part or parts of us believe, are serving us. Nobody holds on to a self-defeating idea if all of who they are thinks it's a self-defeating idea. Some of who they are thinks it's a good idea.
Right.
So that's the thing. There's a bit of a muddle to be unpicked. Change work becomes unsimple for these reasons. And in the end, this is why we never get there. It's if we're doing self-development work or even change work, some people go, oh, yes, I only ever work with people for 15 minutes. I come in, we'll do a breakthrough session. We'll fix 50,000 things in an afternoon. I don't know, maybe, but like that person is still a work in progress. We're always works in progress. We never get to see ahead of time what the right way for me to be is in order to be most effective in the world. We got some ideas, some hunches, some feelings, but we have to feel our way towards being a good fit for the world. I can't remember who was saying this, but there's that idea from Darwinism of survival of the fittest. I can't remember who said this, saying that's not quite right. It should be survival of the fit. If you fit, you survive. If you fit in with your psychosocial environment, you survive. If you're a bad fit, you don't survive. So we want to be a good fit, but we don't know what a good fit is ahead of time. We have to find our way towards that in life. There's trial and error, there's learning, and sometimes there's unlearning of erroneous conclusions that are holding us back. But it's never entirely clear what those are. So the only way we can ever find our way towards being the best fit we can be in our life is through a degree of trial and error, which is why in the way I do change work, I'm like, I don't know what the right thing to do is. But we're going to do trial and error throughout this session, and we're going to calibrate to what seems to be moving you closer to what seems to be a better fit for you. And we're going to work with the deeper intelligence of your system that goes beyond any individual part that objects in finding our way towards that. So there are ambiguities in these things, and if there weren't, the work would be a lot easier.
So there you go. Hope you enjoyed that. And I hope that if you were not familiar with Timeline before this episode, that you're intrigued enough to take a look, because as I said up front, I personally find so much utility in this. I've gotten so much use out of it for myself and clients over the years that I just want to spread the word about it because I like it so much. If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach us here at changeworkingpod@gmail.com. Give us your thoughts, any feedback, ideas for episodes. And if you have any questions, we'll try to answer those on a future episode. See you next time.
Changeworking is produced by Ruckus Sky. For information on training, go to clientshifts.com.